We had our 4 biological children in quite quick succession. It's kind of our strategy to just like pop them out one after the other, you know, God willing. It's a really paradoxical season. You feel kind of like void of significance, and yet at the same time, you know that there are these little people that are utterly reliant on you. I think because I knew that I was called to other stuff, like outside of the home, outside of my children, and yet I didn't have scope to do much of that. I therefore felt like, I'm just kind of in this holding pattern. For me, it started to breed this sense of missing out, resentment, like, does nobody see this? And as the years have gone on and I've now moved on from that season, I can look back and I've realized, oh my goodness, like God was at work. This wasn't an on hold season. Not only was God at work through my children, but God was at work at me, shaping me. He was doing stuff in my life that I don't know that he would have ever had the opportunity to do in another season. I recognize now that we place so much value on success. You know, we often think that the fruit of life is our outward successes. We measure it by the metrics of what is visible and seen. And yet God just doesn't work like that. God is so much more interested in the unseen. And given that much of motherhood in those early years is unseen, God was profoundly at work. If only I could have seen a bit more of that at the time. If only I could have recognized for myself the value in that, not just for my children, but for me. And I'd love to imagine a society where we do place much greater value on that time. You know, I'd go to dinner parties during that season, and I'd get chatting to somebody that was doing something really interesting with their life, and they'd say to me, "And what do you do?" I'd almost find myself apologizing for the fact that that's what I was doing with most of my time. And now I look back and I think, why? What I did was amazing. You actually experience this sort of descent. And it's a really powerful experience because essentially it's death to self. And again, the world will tell you that that's a disaster because suddenly you're not the center of your universe. But in God's eyes, that's the most profound thing that you can do with your life, is to live your life for other people. Because it strips you of all your self-centeredness, all that, and actually becoming a mum, my goodness, it holds a mirror up to all the ways in which I felt selfish and entitled and self-centered, because you have to live your life for your children. And so I think for many women, they go through that period of descent, death to self, to care for their children. But the good news is on the other side of it is all this gold, all this amazing gold that then can be used in future seasons. And that's certainly been my experience.